That's it. My guest today is Jennifer Mattson. Jennifer, it is wonderful to see you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, why don't we get started? If you would, I'm terrible about summarizing other people's books and other people's biographies. So probably the best way to get started is if you would just tell esteemed audience about your background and how you come to publishing.
Okay, esteemed audience. So I graduated with a very highly unusual degree for somebody who went on to work in publishing, and that is an English degree. I wanted to kind of get my feet wet in publishing in some way, and had a little bit of a hard time finding just the exact right niche. So ended up taking the first available sort of job that was the closest possible. And that was at Houghton Mifflin Company, working in the college math textbook division. So, it was pretty far afield from what I kind of envisioned publishing to be. I certainly was thinking about it more along the glamorous fiction acquisition lines. And instead, I was sort of counting geometric diagrams in very long mathematical manuscripts. So that job lasted about a year, but the only reason I bring it up really is that Houghton Mifflin, of course, as everyone listening to this podcast probably will know, has just an extraordinary backlist of children's books. Curious George, The Giver won the Newbery the year that I was working there. And I think just being in that atmosphere made me kind of interested in children's literature and prompted me to really remember how deeply you connect with the books you read as a kid. And so I started becoming just a little bit more interested in going into children's book publishing specifically, and had a few informational interviews with the editors at Houghton Mifflin Children's. So what they told me is that if I was interested in doing that, I ought to work in a bookstore, particularly children's bookstore. So I ended up working in several different children's bookstores over the span of maybe 2 years. And that was really my segue into working in children's books. And I would recommend that to anyone who's in their early 20s wanting to get into publishing. So I went from the bookstore experience, which was in Boston, because that's where Houghton Mifflin is based. And then go ahead. Yeah.
What was it specifically about working at a children's bookstore that helped prepare you for a career in children's literature that working in math books just wouldn't do?
Well, I think that the direct experience of seeing kids and gatekeepers be drawn to particular titles in a store is really important. It's also important to see the titles that aren't being picked up off the shelves and wind up just getting beaten up and thrown out or returned to the publisher at the end of the day. So it's kind of an irreplaceable experience where you really are seeing point of purchase, how the books live in the point of purchase world, in a way you don't when you're kind of siloed in your editorial office. So I went from bookstores to working at Penguin. My first job was in marketing, and I moved from marketing into editorial, and worked in editorial at Dutton Children's Books, which is an imprint of Penguin, for about 5 years. And then personal circumstances took me to Chicago from New York City. So at that point, I kind of had to reevaluate. There aren't a lot of major publishing houses, although there are a few very good ones in Chicago, but the opportunities aren't quite as robust. So at that point, I switched to being a book reviewer for children's books at Booklist, did that for about 5 years. And then my husband, he's an academic, so he went on sabbatical. He's a mathematician, so maybe there's like a weird connection there between my first job in publishing to my personal life.
Were you together at the time you were working on math books?
No, actually, no. So it was some kind of very deeply embedded connection. So the book reviewing job was at American Library Association. I worked at Booklist magazine. But when he went on sabbatical, we were in California for a year, and that's where Andrea Brown Agency is based. So I realized that could be kind of an interesting way to get back to some of my publishing roots. I had kind of been wanting to have more hands-on experience with the manuscripts and with authors. I missed that part of publishing when I was a book reviewer, although there were many things I did like about being a book reviewer. But it was great to connect up with Andrea Brown Agency, and she's just such a supportive boss and willing to let her agents work remotely. So I was able to remain in Chicago once we moved back from California after the sabbatical. So that was about 10 years ago, and I've been at the agency ever since.